time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
What it do, family and friends? Welcome back to the Church of Black Power, and happy MLK Day to you. And seeing that it is MLK Day, I know that the internet's going to be flooded with different broadcasts and videos dedicated to MLK. And I'm pretty sure the opening video has been used 1,000 times over. However, I did want to touch on his last interview given 11 months before his assassination, 1967. And I want to touch on that interview because in that interview, there were so many jewels dropped, and 56 years after King has passed away, these issues are still an issue for Black Americans. These issues are still an issue for Black Americans. And one of the things that I love that he spoke about is the concept of visual villains. How people in the North are, let's just say, the Democrats, Black Democrats, to be more specific, have become so, how do you say, comfortable that they are now complicit in their own oppression. Let me say that again. How Black Democrats are, the way he put it, Northerners, people in the North, was getting so comfortable, or they were so comfortable, and still are so comfortable, to where they are now complicit in their own oppression. So I want to get into that, and let's honor our brother today.
Well, in the South, particularly in Alabama, you had visible villains: Jim Clark, Bull Connor, cattle prods, police dogs. But in the North, you don't have those visible villains. Isn't it hard to get your people aroused and directed at something that isn't visible?
Well, that's exactly right, and this is what I was saying when I said it's harder to see a target. In the South, in the nonviolent movement, we were aided always, on the whole, by the brutality of our opponent. It isn't the same way in the North. The other thing is that you don't have legal segregation in the North as you do in the South. So it is much more difficult to get people to see exactly what you're doing, but it isn't an impossible job. It's a hard, it's a tedious job at times to get people to be aroused from their apathetic slumbers, but I still feel that Negroes in the North can be motivated just as they were motivated in the South. And I think as time goes on with the growing economic deprivation in the Negro community, it will even be easier because people will come to see that not only is something wrong in general, but something is wrong in particular in their own economic and housing situations.
And see, this is what we were talking about. The new black media. When they try to fear-monger us with like people like Trump when Trump was going to win in 2016. They tried to fear-monger us. And people didn't go for it. We stood on our square. And you saw Trump get put into office. But then, when Trump got put into office, what did you see happen? You seen a common enemy, a visible villain given to the black community and still is used as a visible villain, just not working as much anymore because the real visible villain was elected in 2020. And we're able to see the harm that this visible villain is doing to the black community, especially with his open border policies. Especially with giving policy to everyone else and excluding black Americans from the same policies. When we need those policies more than anybody else, when we are owed those policies, when we deserve those policies. There is literally no reason why this should be happening. But it's good that it's happening. Because now we have this visible villain show himself to be worse than the so-called visible villain that was produced for us and given to us. Otherwise, Negroes would create excuses after excuses trying to justify what's going on until it hits your doorstep. You don't know or don't care. Let's continue.
Well, what is it? I mean, how do you find it? It's very subtle in the North, is it not?
It's subtle, but it's becoming much more visible. Anybody can see that the schools are more segregated in the North today than they were in 1954 when the Supreme Court rendered its decision declaring segregation unconstitutional. Anybody can look around the ghetto and see that ghetto schools are predominantly segregated and devoid of quality. Anyone who moves through a major ghetto of our country will see the housing conditions. People don't have to be reminded that they are forced to live in slums in many instances, and they're often rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. And it isn't too hard to see the exploitation that the Negro confronts in the ghetto, where he is forced to pay more for less and constantly trying to make ends meet, but because of either no job as a result of unemployment or a job that is so economically unprofitable that the person can't make ends meet. And I think they see all of these things, and more they're coming to see them, because before the people of the North were looking to the South and they supported the struggles of the South. Now they're coming to see that their problems are very real and they've got organized to grapple with them.
And after 56 years of this man being transitioned, what has changed? I mean, if you really think about it, we still in the slums. We still being exploited. We're still being targeted. There's literally nothing that has changed. Let's continue.
There's something hypocritical about the fact that the South existed and the North could point the finger. And then when the Civil Rights Acts were passed in the early 60s, you couldn't point the finger anymore.
Well, there was no doubt about the hypocrisy of large segments of the nation on the whole question of racial equality. I think the best example is that many of the senators from the North and the West, and congressmen generally, who voted for civil rights legislation in 64 and even 65 with the Voting Rights Bill, refused last year to vote for civil rights legislation because it dealt with an issue applicable to the North, the whole housing question. And this, it seems to me, was the greatest expression of the hypocrisy of many of our citizens and many of the senators and congressmen of the North.
And that's where we are right now when we're speaking about reparations today. When we're speaking about policies that affect the black community positively today. We have these same senators in the North, Democrats, and representatives in the North, Democrats, as well as Republicans, but we don't vote Republican to the tune of 85% over. But we're being stonewalled by the party that we are the bedrock for. We're being stonewalled in our policy attempts. We're being stonewalled in our demands for reparation and restitution. By these same people, the same kind of people who didn't want to even sign in the Civil Rights Bill. But we forced them to sign that Civil Rights Bill because we had a visible villain. We all knew what we needed to do. We all knew what we needed to do. So again, what has changed? After 56 years of our brothers transitioning on. But they love to tell you about the king that I had a dream. But they don't like to tell you about the dream being deferred. And the fact that we still is fighting for the same economic equity and inclusion that this man was fighting for 56 years ago. Let's continue.
But isn't that part of the dilemma now? That people knew that Negroes were being denied what was guaranteed to them by the Constitution, by the fact that they were citizens of this country. Then when they were given those rights, do you feel the white community said, well, we've given them all that we have, now it's up to them?
Well, I think the dilemma is much deeper, and I think one during this period of transition has to be very honest with America. And honesty impels me to admit that America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South. And the other thing is that there has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. I think we have to see that vacillation has always existed, ambivalence has always existed, and this to me is the so-called white backlash. It's merely a new name for an old phenomenon. I see the white backlash as a continuation of the same ambivalence and vacillation of white America on the whole question of racial justice that has existed since the founding of our nation. I think the other thing that we must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we're getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Do you think...
And again, what has changed? See, like I said, this interview is hitting nail after nail after nail, and it was done 57 years ago. And it still applies today. And it still applies today. We're out here still fighting for those economic programs that he just spoke about right now. But as he said, it's easier to do an integration program. It's easier to have your black friends around and all this other stuff. It ain't so easy to literally cut the check and overnight balance out the equality scales because we're given the equity that's owed to us, which will bring true equality and true justice. But that's not something that they want to do. So instead, what they do is they give money to everybody else, give programs to everybody else, and pull everybody else under their little umbrella, trickle down all the resources to them, and make sure we get none of it. And make sure we get none of it. So he's still hitting, he's still on point. 56 years after transitioning, our brother's still on point. But this isn't the king they want you to know. They want you to know about him wanting his sons and daughters to go to school with little white kids, little black kids, and they stop right there. When they so-called give the black community things, it's things that are not tangible that will push his dream forward. Our dream, the actual dream, forward. Because the statue ain't gonna cost what true economic equity is going to cost. A statue is a one-time fee that they ain't gotta worry about. That's easy. Cutting that check, though, not so much.
White people in this country, and I'm talking about non-segregationists, people devoid or thinking they're devoid of racism,
than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Do you think white people in this country, and I'm talking about non-segregationists, people devoid or thinking they're devoid of racism, do you have any idea of what they want the Negro to be in America?
Well, it depends on the level that we are talking here, because I think you have to make a distinction between the people who are genuinely and absolutely committed in the white community on the question of racial equality. And I must confess that I think they're in a very small minority. I think the vast majority of white Americans will go but so far. It's a kind of installment plan for equality, and they are always looking for an excuse to go but so far.
Why are they looking for the excuse? What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here in chains, treated in very inhuman fashion, and this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
Now, when he was talking about white folks only wanted to go so far, and this, that, and the third, and then they try to make up every excuse to not go to the depth that's necessary. This is the same thing that we still see today. Have you ever heard someone say, I'm not racist, but this is all happening just too fast? You ever heard somebody say, we need to study? We need to study means, whoa, slow down. This is going too quick. Let's study a remedy before we actually produce one. Let's study what was done, even though we know what was done, even though there's so many studies to show us the effects of slavery and how it trickled down through the years. But we need a study because this is happening too fast. This is moving too fast. And another thing that he spoke to was our lineage and then our claim for reparations. But they don't want you to talk about that king. They don't want you to talk about the pro-black king that he was. They want you to talk about this made-up intersectional image that they carefully curated and handed off to us. That's what they want you to talk about. But as we see, our brother stood on his square, as he should. As he should. And with that, family, I just want to honor, show love, give grace, say happy birthday to the late, great, immortal Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, hit the likes button, hit that bell, make sure you're getting notified. Also, Dr. Khalid Muhammad's birthday was on the 12th. And I didn't have a chance to record the video that I wanted to do for Dr. Khalid Muhammad because I didn't have enough time in the little space that I had. I needed a little bit more time in order to do the video. So I will be doing the video and I will be posting it this week. And we're going to be talking about how Dr. Khalid Muhammad is still on point. You know what? I might just start a series, the Still On Point series, because there's a lot of greats, a lot of our elders and the people who fought for us who still on point till this day. And I think that's what I'll do. That's what we'll do. We'll do the Still On Point series. Because we need that clarity. We running around here crazy in the head. You got black folks out here literally still on that Democratic plantation and refuse to leave. Stephen and Django. You got career bootlicks. And you got tethers, people who look like us that has no intentions on furthering the agenda for the people who built the country and made it so that they can be here. So yeah, we're gonna do the Still On Point series. With that being said, family and friends, much love to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your holiday. Peace, family. The doors of the church are now closed.